Well, where are we? Where are we? Still behind the standby.
Standing by, sir. Actually, you're sitting by a lovely set of trees. Interesting new virtual background, or is it virtual?
Oh, no. This is very real. This is very real. This is like being on a farm. This is beautiful out here. It is a wonderful day, just a perfect day in the neighborhood, as they say.
Wonderful day in the neighborhood. Welcome, everybody, to Chaps Many Culture. This nature-loving chap is Brett Parry from Down Under, and this bookworm chap right here is Christian from Germany, and none of us are in our native land. We are in the US broadcasting live on the interwebs. How is you today, Brett?
I am fantastic, and yes, we're mixing up the times a little bit. We're making space for, or we're bringing in the diversity of the global village in which we partake, and that, of course, means that we shouldn't always do a particular time. We should look at different time zones so we can include said people that might be interested for some reason or other, surprisingly, in listening to us rabble on.
Ramble. Yeah, so you see today is a different time slot. That would make it a no-brainer for our friends on the West Coast or people in any time zone that is a daylight time zone right now. And unfortunately, that means that some of you who live in Eastern Europe or in Asia or in the Middle East, you might find yourself wondering, where the hell were they this morning or this afternoon or this evening? Well, there's always a replay. So YouTube channels work well. Facebook pages work well too. So make sure that you are liking it and that you're subscribing to the YouTube channel so you never miss a beat and you get the updates when the new episodes are available. So we'll move our time slots back and forth a little bit to accommodate for all the viewers out there, and we've already arranged for a few guests that live in, well, going by our vantage point, live in very remote corners of the world when we look at their time zones. So whenever we're trying to coordinate guests that live some 11 to 13 hours away from us, then we need to get creative in what time zone would work for both of us, or who's going to stay up late or who's going to get up early. But we're making it work. So this week is the, well, here for us on the eastern half or the east of the Mississippi half of the United States, it's the afternoon slot. For some of you, it's super late at night, and some of you are just getting up. So welcome, everybody, to Chaps Many Cultures. And Brett, have we decided if we're going to have a topic this week, or are we just going to be ourselves? What is it?
Last week was a wonderful, may I say, last week, I've enjoyed every show, but last week's series about art was very impactful, and I think that we need to build upon it. And it was a great idea to kind of come up with a theme for the week. Maybe we probably shouldn't put ourselves under too much pressure to do that every week. So today we thought, well, there was something that came up in a discussion with a coaching client of mine last week, which seems to be a recurring topic. And it came out of, the reason I'm so fascinated by this, that it came out of a very impactful coaching program I did a couple of years ago with an executive who is from, some might say, a very formal culture, being the UK, and obviously used to, in his kind of realm around, running around the world as an executive in India, places like Germany, you may have heard of that, and Northern Italy as well. These are places with a lot of hierarchy. And today we kind of dropped the hint. It was a pretty subtle, not a subtle hint in our imagery, that then a lot of cultures there is a pecking order, hence the chickens and the eggs, and maybe not everybody got that, but it works for me. So, and I'm in charge.
It took me an hour to get it, so it's all right.
But it was interesting that this gentleman had been around the world, spoke multiple languages, was a senior executive in his company, and he had been in many, many cultures where he was the boss. He was the guy, the top guy, and everybody looked up to him. Everybody assigned the responsibility, which he happily took because he was a senior guy. He found himself going to my country, of course, a place where when you get off the plane, and you just pull your pants on the same as everybody else. And we don't really care where you're from, who you are, what you do. And it wasn't that he didn't like it. He actually loved it. He loved the fact that his new colleagues, the people around him, the people who worked for him were happy to come and knock on his door. But he didn't. He had spent 35 years of his professional life being separated somewhat. So this is what has come up. It's very difficult for him to move into a culture that wasn't hierarchical. But a lot of us come from cultures that are very relaxed and move into hierarchical cultures. So it has been kind of as somebody, I know you come from a country that is renowned maybe for its hierarchy. I know the answer I gave to my coaching client. I'm wondering, I wanted to get Christian's perspective, and of course offering tips to you, the viewers and the listeners, of course, if you're listening on the podcast. What do you do when you come from a very flat culture? Say you're in the US and you go into a place where you have to live into the role of being the leader. You really have to step up and do that. So what's your comments on it, pal?
Well, might I say that the question of hierarchy or not hierarchy is one that is quite loaded, because there's often this assumption that we can put national flags. Ooh, wow, that's a big swoosh right there. That we can put national flags on the question of whether people will be drawn to hierarchical work orders or more egalitarian work organization. And I think that's a difficult way to do it if we're only using nationalities to identify that. I think a lot of it has to do what type of organization you are part of, whether you are part of let's say a startup that is bootstrapping to get off the ground and still finding itself and organizing work as you go along as a group of people with grand ideas and maybe some funding to get that floating, then hierarchies may not work well for you. However, if you work for a well-established organization that's been around for decades, if not generations, there has been an order, a pecking order that has established itself over the years that has taken on a life of its own. And sometimes you find organizations in stereotypically hierarchical societies, and let's pick maybe India as one, or let's pick Japan or Indonesia or Mexico as nation cultures that are often referred to as very hierarchical. But if you look at a Mexican startup, it may not be as hierarchical. And then you look at a country like the US, where you have old established organizations, maybe you work in military or defense contracting, where there is the expectation of a clear order of command or chain of command, or you work for like an old organization in automotive or energy or any type of industrial manufacturing, you'll find yourself in a fairly egalitarian, low hierarchy society, but in an organization where there's a clear chain of command, a clear order of who is the boss and who gives instructions and who has to take those instructions and run with them. Yes, Germany tends to be more on the hierarchical side, but then that's a generational shift that's been happening over the years. So I'm a Gen Xer, and I grew up in a fairly hierarchical environment, yet I've worked in organizations both in the US and in Germany where hierarchies didn't matter all that much. So I think it's a moving target, and that's why probably your client was maybe a bit confused or overly enthusiastic when he entered a new work environment. It's hard to pin down and say this is what it's going to be. So it's in my experience, dealing with hierarchies or lack thereof is something that, as a global professional, you want to develop really fine-tuned antennas to detect what the level of hierarchy and deference is in the organization that you're part of, and how you can maybe adjust yourself accordingly. I don't know if that's the answer that you were looking for, Brett, but this has been my experience over the years.
Yeah, I think we had identified with him. It was really it was a discomfort. It was a level of risk that he and I, when we talk about, say, a tool like GlobeSmart that we use to do some assessments in at least getting the conversation started. And yes, it is the conversation starts with national cultures. But I think for him, it was really understanding that he had seen in many of his experiences that if he didn't act as the boss, if he didn't take that role and live into that role in the culture like India or Germany, in his particular case, he found that he was putting the people around him at ill at ease. They weren't comfortable. For them, the comfort of having a strong leader who was actually taking on the role of responsibility was something that they were used to. In Australia, in terms of the Australian culture, we kind of we're happy with a little bit of non-compliance, a little bit of larrikinism, as they say in our vernacular, and we look for people who are willing to come down or be a part of the group. We have that very famous tall poppy syndrome, but it is something that that's why in the GlobeSmart assessment, risk and certainty comes under egalitarianism and status, because there is a level of you can be the most generous, outgoing and inclusive boss that you want to be if you move to a very hierarchical culture and your intention is very generous to try and bring everybody into the conversation. However, you might be putting these people outside of their comfort zone.
I've had this issue come up in a training not too long ago with a U.S. Silicon Valley-based medical device manufacturer, big organization, big company, and they're establishing a hub, a IT support hub in the state of Maharashtra. And here's why this hierarchy dimension, or this hierarchy feature of human behavior is so relevant, or so sometimes tricky, because oftentimes in my experience, Westerners, whether they are from North America or from Western Europe, let's say the quote unquote colonial powers of the global economy, they sometimes feel, or they have this self-image of, we are egalitarian, meaning we are empowering our team members to make decisions independently. We actually foster independent and autonomous decision-making. We're being agile, buzzword of the season. We're being agile in how we develop our projects and how we organize work. And that simply fell flat for this client when they were dealing with their counterparts in India. These were fairly young professionals in their mid-20s to late 30s. So you would argue these are modern-day professionals from India who have overcome some of the old Indian cultural stereotypes. Still, they were wanting and expecting their North American and European superiors to take initiative and tell them clearly what the path is, tell them clearly what to expect from them, give them a clear guideline. This is who gives me instructions. This is who I can turn to if I have a question. And this is who I can expect to be available for me if I am lost, or if I am in need of new direction, and green lighting and thumbs upping the next step of my work process. For somebody from the West Coast of the United States, this was almost like heresy. They were like, well, we thought we hired the most talented people, young people in India, college graduates who want to better themselves, and we give them the opportunity of a lifetime, and they still need to be, quote unquote, handheld and babysat. These were the words that were brought to me as the facilitator of these trainings. Like, whoa, we got our work cut out for ourselves here. So there are two different expectations. One expecting clear guidance and strong, maybe authoritarian and patronage type of leadership, like a father, a mother figure giving protection and guidance to the underlings or the the people down the hierarchy. And on the other hand, you have Western leadership expectations that say, well, aren't you happy that we finally freed you from the constraints of hierarchical power distribution? Now you can go about and make decisions independently to a certain degree. Well, these people who grew up with strong interdependence and strong hierarchies throughout their lives, they were lost. They thought, what type of leadership is this? I don't know what to do next. And then what did they do? They did nothing. And that's the worst thing that would happen in a global organization, right? So old habits die hard. Cultures are deeply ingrained in us. And yes, there might be nuances and development over the generations, but in this case, there was a clear headbutt of expectations.
Yeah. I tell people I even have a visceral response to the word boss. When I've got a client that says, my boss is such and such, and I go, hang on a second, let's sit with that word for a little bit, because that brings up responses to me. I don't know what it is. Maybe I haven't really had a boss for a lot of years, so, but it is just the implied sense of hierarchy that brings. So that very word creates a response in me. So it can be just our words, right? It's an interesting. You used it in a text. Kristen used it in a text to me earlier today, and my first response is, no. We're not. Nobody's the boss here.
Well, this was a game, right? And we play with this tongue in cheek a little bit. Brett texted me earlier today. Let's talk about hierarchies, and I responded, "Of course, sir," or "Of course, boss."
Boss, right? You say use boss.
Because I kind of know you, right? So I know that you don't like hierarchies, but playing the submissive underling to you via text message got you triggered for a second. And this is how it will show up for you in a global workplace. You will find yourself being surrounded. If you're an egalitarian leader and you find yourself working with colleagues and team members that expect a more clear hierarchical order, you'll be surrounded by people who will say, "Sí, señor," or will say, "Yes, boss," or will say whatever else it is in another language, and they will expect of you to be more assertive. And you may not want that. It will go against your grain. It will go against how you prefer to behave. And if you don't meet those expectations, you might actually be seen as a weak leader. You think of yourself as a strong, empowering leader. You can distribute power. You can let go of all this boss mentality. And your team members who expect the opposite will see you as a weak leader because you're not willing to take the reins. You're not willing to take command. So who's right? Who's wrong? None of you. It's just two people with different expectations, two ships passing in the night, basically.
Very true. And of course.
What does Patricia say? Corporate culture may call for hierarchy in an egalitarian culture. Yes. Exactly, Patricia. I think I referred to it in not as elegant terms earlier. So thanks for distilling my rambling into one concise sentence. Much obliged. Excellent. Karen says, I'm fascinated by the very idea of a flat management structure. My professional experience is all hierarchy-based and entrenched, which could be the case even in a quote-unquote egalitarian society. If you've ever lived in academia, for example, you might find it very, very hierarchical. And the hierarchies may not be along power distributions. They may be along the number of degrees that hang framed on your wall dimension, right? Thanks, Patricia. Yeah, we think this is crucial. In fact, and Karen says, from the Dutch boss, meaning master. There you have your explanation, Mr. Brett. Boss. See, I did not know that it came from Dutch. Interesting.
I did not know that either. This is why we have this wonderful community of people.
Lovely. And here I am, the German speaker, not knowing this. I'm drawing a blank here. I'm thankful for the learning, Karen. Awesome. So you're the boss lady then, teaching us. Love it.
Well, Karen actually is Karen. For those who don't know, Patricia, both our wonderful commenters here at the moment. Patricia, ex-president ex-boss of CETA USA, and Karen, the current administrative boss. I mean, she is the boss. She really runs the show in the background of the organisation, and we're very thankful for all her great work, because without her, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing.
Here's a fun linguistic stumbling block for the German speakers. So the German word for boss is chef, and it's spelled just like the English chef. However, chef in German means boss, and then the Germans come to the United States and says, "Who's the chef here? I am. So you all follow my command." And the Americans think, "So he's going to cook a meal for us now? What's going on?" So that usually takes a while for Germans to filter through. There's another dimension that goes along with hierarchy that I think is well illustrated in this book. I'm going to bring up a slide in a second, but here's a book that I would encourage all of you to read. Let me move it here so you can actually see it. It's called The Culture Map by the fabulous Erin Meyer. She is from Minnesota. Yeah, you betcha. And she teaches in Paris at INSEAD University. She wrote the book, The Culture Map. If you haven't read it yet, it's about time you put that on your wish list, reading list to complete list. And I'm going to share an image from her book or from her work that will explain a little bit that it's not only about hierarchies, but there's also another thing we need to consider when we look at this. So you see here the hierarchy is over here on the one side and egalitarianism on the other. And it coincides with, and let me remove that banner so you can actually all see this. It coincides with whether hierarchy is distributed top down or if there is a consensus within the organization. So you say, what? Mind blown? What does this all mean? So you can be quite a hierarchical society, and you look at that top right quadrant, cultures like Indonesia or China, Saudi Arabia as a stand-in for many Arabic or Middle Eastern cultures, Russia and India. Also Mexico that I mentioned earlier, falling on the hierarchical side of societies. And they're also quite top-down, meaning the boss or the superior will direct or give direction from the top of the pyramid, from the top of the hierarchy down through the organization. Now, Brett mentioned my native culture of Germany, which also tends to be quite hierarchical, but you see it's more consensual. Well, what does that mean? So it means that while we have hierarchies, while we accept that there's a leader and that there are people with more power than others, people in consensually hierarchical organizations want to bring people on board. And they usually do that from lower hierarchical levels going upward. And the picture book perfect culture for this is Japan. If you haven't read or heard about the concept of nemawashi, I would encourage you to look that up. Go on professorgoogle.com or any other research site that you feel inclined to use. Nemawashi is the concept. Building consensus from the lowest hierarchical levels all the way up to the top level, and then create decisions for the entire organization. And then on the other side, you see egalitarian cultures like the US or many of the Anglo cultures. Actually, these are all Anglo cultures here in that quadrant: the US, UK, Canada, Australia. So very little hierarchy. However, they can be quite top down, which is off-putting to the Dutchies and the Danish or all the Nordics who come to North America and think, well, don't they have egalitarian power distribution? Well, don't they all come together and make decisions jointly and nobody's the real boss? Well, not so fast, cowboy, because in North America and many Anglo cultures, it may not be a pyramidic power structure. However, there is still the common understanding that somebody will be the tiebreaker, somebody will be the decision maker, and eventually will make that decision unilaterally without building consensus. So lots to unpack here, but this is just one example of how to look at this. And there's more to it than simply the question, well, is it egalitarian or is it hierarchical? There are a few other aspects to consider. Brett?
Absolutely. Fantastic. I'm glad I brought that up.
So that's the book. Get it, people.
Well, get the book. Get the book. Many other
Many
books. You could have a library. You could have a library like Christian behind him. He looks smart. I look, I don't know, outdoorsy. I should have animals. Really, I'm Australian. I should have animals out here. That's what I should have.
You should have a wombat next to you. That would help.
Absolutely. Well, that's it. We'll put that one in the books, as they say. All right, we'll put that one in the book.
And nobody knows how many of these I actually read. They look good, but who knows?
Oh, yes, that's right.
So, concludes Monday's session. We might have a few more books because I'm going to pull some of them out of the shelf here because I do like books, and this is one that I just got in the mail yesterday. So I will not talk about this one because I'm still digging, putting my claws into it. But we'll talk about some books that both Brett and I read, or one of us read, and we think might add value to your work. So let's be excited about that.
Absolutely. Book club. We might sell our own book club.
Ooh, okay.
That would be
All
good.
right.
All right, guys. Thank you
Monday's
again.
in the can. Thanks, everybody. 2 Chaps, Many Cultures, and mic drop, right, Brett?
We're out.